there's this Brandon Aiyuk thing that just doesn't seem like it ever wants to go away. You got agents apologizing to content creators. We've got people backpedaling, dogs and cats sleeping together. What are we ever going to get this thing done? Is this thing ever going to reach a conclusion? And now I'm starting to wonder, does Aiyuk even want to be traded? Does he want out? Does he not want out? Now his wide receiver coach says he wants to stay. He's holding in. A lot of people think it's personal and that Shanahan's done with Aiyuk and that he won't bring him back and is not open to bringing him back, despite the fact that he said exactly the opposite. Make some sense of this. What's the latest in your mind on Aiyuk?
What a wild ride this has been, Larry, because I remember we were talking about this time and time again in April in the lead up to the NFL draft. And I was saying on the 49ers report, if there's a time to trade away Brandon Aiyuk, it makes sense in the lead up to the draft. Therefore, you get some draft compensation back and or players, and those pieces will allow you to better prepare for the upcoming 2024 season. And at that point, Niner fans were saying, Chase, I'm so tired of the Brandon Aiyuk conversation. Can we talk about something else? And that was 5 months ago. And here we are, August 9th on this Friday, and we're still talking about the Brandon Aiyuk situation. Now, what's very interesting is that when you think back to some of the previous contract extensions that the Niners have signed their homegrown players to, George Kittle was not signed until August 14th of 2020. But that had a lot less dialogue and a lot less controversy, and it was less tense than this Brandon Aiyuk situation. And I know a few weeks ago, we kind of posed the question, which was a more dramatic offseason, Deebo Samuel or Brandon Aiyuk? Because Deebo unfollowed the Niners on Instagram. He wiped his Instagram of all things Niners related. But at the time, I thought, yeah, Deebo's offseason was more hectic than this. Nothing beats this offseason from Brandon Aiyuk. I have coworkers here at Chat Sports who cover the NFL and other teams, and they're saying to me, can the Niners just figure out what's going on with Brandon Aiyuk, sign him or trade him? I'm tired of hearing about it, and we have to talk about this every single day because it continues to be a paramount conversation and one of the biggest storylines in the entire National Football League. And then today, in this course of daily updates, we have his wide receiver coach, TJ Houshmandzadeh, saying other teams are offering Brandon Aiyuk $32 million per year. Aiyuk is willing to play for way less to stay with the San Francisco 49ers at $28 million per year. So fans are outraged and saying Aiyuk should take less to stay home with the Niners. He's willing to take less, but the Niners are not moving off that $26 million per year number. And then you have Herm Edwards, who coached Aiyuk at Arizona State, right? Coached John Lynch in the NFL, brought Ricky Pearsall to Arizona State, saying there's no doubt that Aiyuk wants to stay with the Niners, and I believe that because he doesn't want to go to Cleveland. He doesn't want to go to New England. I think the two teams that he'd be open to playing for are Pittsburgh and Washington, but they haven't upped their offer to the Niners' liking. And if the Niners are going to be so stubborn about the $26 million per year number, and they're going to be so stubborn about what they're willing to pay Aiyuk, I think this is on the Niners here. They have to be willing to move off that $26 million per year price tag, go up $2 million on an average annual value. And before you say, Chase, these contracts are nuanced and there's guaranteed money at play, I get that. But the salary cap is going to continue to increase. We might add an 18th game, and $2 million per year in the grand scheme of things is not all that much when you think about bringing back a 26-year-old second-team All-Pro who's literally gotten better and has had better production every year that he's been in the NFL. So I hope there's a resolution soon. I think there needs to be a resolution soon because the Niners need to figure out what their receiving core is going to look like, how their offense is going to maneuver this upcoming season, because week one is not far away, and week one, the opponent, no slouch. New York Jets are going to have one of the best defenses in the NFL.
No question. And the Niners are better with Aiyuk. The question I would have for you is that, does it seem to you, Chase, that, I don't know, I mean, it's like, I almost feel like this is not about the net difference between what the Niners have offered and what Aiyuk's asking for. it feels to me like it has gotten personal. Like I'm sick of him. I'm sick of Aiyuk. And I'm talking about Shanahan. I'm sick of Aiyuk. I'm sick of this hold in. I don't respect the hold in. Schlereth ripped the hold in, said Aiyuk was soft. Schlereth is a buddy of the Shanahans.
Yep.
Do you think Schlereth is going to call him soft if he doesn't think that the Shanahans agree with him? Probably not. So, there's that. And when Kyle's been asked, hey, how do you differentiate a hold out versus a hold in? Kyle's just like, I don't know. He wants no part of it, but you can kind of tell. It's like there's something. I don't know if it was Aiyuk saying that Jaden Daniels could take his game to the next level and all the song and dance about I'd love to be a commander and you're playing in this offense. I don't know if maybe Shanahan got rubbed wrong, but I just think that my read on it, at least, is that Aiyuk said and did all offseason what he felt like he needed to do to try to further his cause. Did it work or not? It hasn't worked thus far. But I get the sense that Aiyuk, despite all the things he said, despite the flirtations with the Commanders, but despite he texting, Tomlin and all the different things that he's done to try to, rattle the cage and create, waves, I think at the end of the day, he's still cool with coming back. I think Shanahan's the one who's not cool with having him back. I think Shanahan's done with him, even though Shanahan's about to march this guy out of town, despite the fact that to do so would probably hurt the 49ers Super Bowl chances. And Shanahan seems so stubborn, like he doesn't care either way. It's like, you know what? I'm marching this guy out of town anyway. That's my read on it. What am I too close to this? Am I seeing this right? I mean, I like Kyle Shanahan. I like John Lynch, but I get the feeling that Shanahan's the emotional one and Lynch is like the true adult, like grounded one. And that Lynch has his hands full just trying to keep Shanahan, off the reservation and away from the ledge. I don't know. I just get the sense that Shanahan is close to Aiyuk coming back.
That serves as a perfect segue to what I want to get to next, because you throw out a word, stubborn and stubbornness. I think stubbornness is part of the reason why the San Francisco 49ers have come up short and they haven't won a Super Bowl yet, because Kyle Shanahan has been a very stubborn head coach in some really tense moments in games. He's been willing to adapt and adjust and change the way that he does things offensively from a pass protection standpoint, a schematic standpoint in the passing game, and just overall as being a head coach in the NFL. He is stuck in his ways. He's very proud of what he does. He comes from a family tree that's obviously really impressive, with his father, Mike Shanahan, winning those Super Bowls with the Denver Broncos. Mike Shanahan back in the day was also very stubborn, and that's why it took him a long time to win those Super Bowls with John Elway on some of those really talented teams, and that's why he really came up short as a head coach before finally breaking through. And I think we're kind of seeing that ring true for Kyle Shanahan here. And that has been a common complaint among fans who understand that Kyle Shanahan has a really great offensive mind. The Niners would not be in the situation that they're in right now and have been without Kyle Shanahan leading this team. To go on this run of 4 NFC title games and 2 Super Bowl appearances in 5 years is a great run that any team in the National Football League would take. But Kyle Shanahan is a very stubborn guy. And I imagine he thinks back to that 2019 team that had the number 1 seed in the NFC. And he's saying, hold on, everybody's trying to tell me that I can't win without Brandon Aiyuk because he's a great all-around wide receiver and a great deep threat. I took Jimmy Garoppolo to a Super Bowl, and at the time, my number 1 wide receiver was a player who we traded for at the deadline, in Emmanuel Sanders, and we were led by my schematic running game and a really good defense. Don't tell me that I can't get back to the Super Bowl without Brandon Aiyuk, because I can find ways to scheme things up. I can find ways to come up with play designs that will allow our offense to be successful. Look at what I've done and the numbers that my offense has put up with Mr. Irrelevant, Brock Purdy, as this team's starting quarterback. I can win without Brandon Aiyuk. And Kyle Shanahan is kind of old school in a way where, look, I think that Aiyuk has miscalculated some of the things that he's done this offseason. I think at times his approach to this has been a little bit petty and a little bit awkward. I don't think Aiyuk is the guy who wants to ruffle feathers. I don't think that Aiyuk is the guy who wants to take to social media and TikTok to try to leverage his situation and getting paid. But he's also looking at how these other wide receivers have gone about it. And he's saying, I probably have to do the same thing. And Kyle Shanahan's probably looking at this saying, look, if you showed up, if you didn't take to social media with all of these antics, we'd find a way to get a deal done. Look at what we've done with George Kittle, Fred Warner, Deebo Samuel, Nick Bosa. We'll find a way. Just don't cause unnecessary distractions for our football team. But that's the modern era with how things are. And while Kyle Shanahan is very tight with a lot of his players, he probably doesn't agree with the approach. So I do think that Kyle Shanahan and his stubbornness is kind of standing in the way of the deal getting done. And then you have to add on top of all of this that Parag is a very stiff negotiator, and Jed York might be looking at this offense saying, do we really want to give $28 million per year to a wide receiver when since the Christian McCaffrey trade, we've thrown the ball at the 32nd rate in the NFL? He probably has some hesitations. Parag negotiates one way and one way only. It's his way or the highway. And then Kyle Shanahan is stubborn. And all of this combined is why we're sitting here going into the second week of August, and Brandon Aiyuk is still without a deal, and there's no resolution.
I'm gonna share the screen here. I'm gonna show you this quote, the 33rd team. Now, this is on the Trey Lance thing from long ago. This is from Akash put this out on Twitter in August of 2023. But here it is. Here's Joe Banner with Ari Myrov, and he's talking on the 33rd team.
Trey Lance start on Sunday.
And you're going to hear Joe Banner, and he's talking about Lance here, but just forget that context. Just listen to what Banner says about Shanahan. And Banner worked with Kyle Shanahan. I think this is really interesting. Watch this little exchange.
Then there is the quarterback situation in San Francisco. And we all saw Trey Lance start on Sunday in the preseason game. And if you just looked at the box score, you probably thought, wow, he had such a good game. But if you watched it, you saw that his touchdown pass should have probably been an interception. You saw that he was sacked 4 times. It was not really a great game for Trey Lance. Joe, Trey has been in these trade chatter all off season long. Brock Purdy is ahead of schedule. They signed Sam Darnold in free agency. Do you feel like Trey's future is in San Francisco? How should they handle all of this here with the regular season approaching in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, so my answer is affected a lot by the fact that I worked with Kyle Shanahan. And he's obviously a really good coach. I worked with some really good offensive coordinators. He is as smart, if not smarter than any of them. But he's a very emotional guy, and he tends to be a fairly short-term thinker. And once you get in his doghouse, it's really hard to get out. But knowing the way Kyle is wired, it's really hard for me to picture how they could ever just get back into a really good, positive place supporting each other. So that leaves me with kind of a simplistic that if they could find another place and give Trey.
So there you go. That's basically the long and the short of it that I wanted to play there. It's just that he's a short-term thinker. He's an emotional guy. And when he kind of makes his decision, he locks in. And I think
keep in mind that Joe Banner was Andy Reid's right-hand man with the Eagles in the early 2000s when they went on that run of 4 straight NFC championship games, and he understands how Andy Reid operates and how Kyle Shanahan operates. And Joe Banner was known to be a very stiff negotiator as well, leading the front office for Philadelphia.
Yeah, so I mean, it just sounds to me like Shanahan is kind of pushed out of shape by Aiyuk, and even though Aiyuk is doing everything in his power to maybe come back to the 49ers or get this thing resolved, it seems like Shanahan is more interested in moving on. I'm not saying the 49ers don't have severe cap problems because of the impending contract that will be handed out to Purdy next year, but they can do any individual move they want to do. And it sounds to me like this has become, like they had their plan and they wanted to replace this guy and they tried to replace him in the draft. And they, I don't know. The whole thing is just so confounding from the standpoint of why didn't they trade him in April when there were so many more seemingly more opportunities. Obviously, they must not have gotten their price. What do you make of the Diana Rossini story, which is that the Niners don't like what the Steelers are offering? The Niners now are in a position where I guess they feel like because Pearsall and Cowing are hurt, they need to get a receiver back, and they don't like either the receivers the Steelers have or the receivers the Steelers are offering them. And there's a lot of speculation that they were going to try to take some picks from Pittsburgh and float those picks to a third team for a receiver. I mean, now we're getting into unprecedented three-way August trades involving players that never happened. So it's like, I don't even know what to say about this. You know what I mean? It's like we're projecting things that like literally never happened in the history of the league. So I don't know what kind of solid ground. What do you make of the Rossini report? And do you think that that's the next chapter here, that the Niners get, I don't know, James Daniels and Dan Moore and a pick for Aiyuk and then trade that pick to Cincy for Higgins or Denver for Sutton, or who knows? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know what to make of all of this reporting, because you have Adam Schefter saying the Niners are in no rush to make a deal. They're going to be patient about this because they want to make sure that if they trade away a second-team All-Pro, they want to get some really good value back. That's a report that I can lean on because that's how good businesses operate. You can't just trade away a second-team All-Pro who's 26 years old, whose numbers have exploded, alongside Brock Purdy for 75 cents on the dollar, which is why if you were to make this trade, you should have done it in the lead up to the NFL draft, because right now it's going to be really hard to get equal value for a player like Aiyuk. And then you have Mike Silver, I believe, who reported that Kyle Shanahan didn't like that Aiyuk gave him a bro hug. I don't really believe that, because it looked to me like Kyle Shanahan dapped up Aiyuk and kind of went in for the bro hug himself. I do believe our assessment that Kyle Shanahan's stubbornness might be in the way of making a deal or getting a deal done. And then you have Diana Rossini saying that the Niners don't really like the asking price, but that's the reality of the situation, because here we are a few weeks into training camp and teams are trying to figure out what their offensive and defensive personnel is going to be on both sides of the football. And if an acquiring team brings in Brandon Aiyuk, you have to get him acclimated. If the Niners bring in some offensive linemen like a Dan Moore, they have to get those offensive linemen acclimated, because Kyle Shanahan's scheme is very complex, especially for offensive linemen, given all of the pull blocking that they have to do and just the overall scheme difficulties. And then as part of this, I'm thinking, well, if the Niners want a wide receiver back and Pittsburgh is the destination, is Calvin Austin going to move the needle? I don't think so. To me, I think the Niners are in a good spot in that wide receiver room, even if they lose Aiyuk, but their offense still isn't going to be as good. And then the latter part of this, are the Niners trying to get some picks back and then kind of pull off an NBA-like trade in which you referenced, which we really don't see often, in which you bring in a third team where the Niners get, let's say, a second and third round pick back for Brandon Aiyuk, and then they flip that second and third and maybe another future pick, and they send that to the Las Vegas Raiders for Devontae Adams, who is very affordable this year and has a non-guaranteed contract following this year, in which you could restructure that for an older player who right now might be better than Brandon Aiyuk, but in the future there's risk because he's 31 years old and he's unhappy with his situation with the Raiders. Could he be a target? Could T. Higgins, who's looking for a long-term deal with the Cincinnati Bengals, be a target as well? But then I think, well, hold on. If you want a player like T. Higgins, he's unhappy with Cincinnati because he's looking for a new deal. So you trade away Aiyuk because you don't want to pay him, but then you bring in T. Higgins and you're going to have to pay him to make this trade worth it. Some people have asked me, why don't you bring in George Pickens? Same situation. You bring in George Pickens, you're going to have to pay him a year or two down the road because he's going to be looking for a new deal. Now, will Higgins or Pickens be as expensive as Aiyuk's $28 million asking price? Maybe not, but the wide receiver market is going to continue to increase. It's going to continue to explode because it's a very important position. But as the NFL salary cap inevitably continues to go up, player contracts will continue to go up, which also involves this part of the conversation. $28 million per year for Brandon Aiyuk a couple of years down the road actually might look like a good contract if he can stay healthy, he can continue to produce, because the wide receiver market will continue to be on the uptick. And I know that the Niners next year are like $35 million over the cap, but they have the most cap space in the NFL right now, like $55 million. And there are ways to massage the cap and pull off salary cap gymnastics. And that's why I'm so perplexed. Get this deal done. Just go up a little bit from that $26 million per year number. It's so telling what TJ Houshmandzadeh, who's Aiyuk's wide receiver coach, is saying. He's saying Aiyuk wants to take less to play with the Niners. He just wants 28 instead of the 32 that other teams are offering, but the Niners won't move off that $26 million per year number. It's just the overall stubbornness of this organization that's really head-scratching. And for me, fans have the right to be completely outraged by the situation, because you cannot blow this Super Bowl window that you have right now. And if you blow the Super Bowl window, the Niners and this stretch, this era, are going to go down as one of the biggest what ifs in the history of the NFL.
Oh, so they're putting themselves in that Buffalo Bills category if they can't get it done with this current regime, let's just say, with Lynch and Shanahan. It does make you think when you're seeing all the hoops that they're jumping through. They drafted Cowing. They drafted Pearsall. They're looking now to get a receiver back from Aiyuk, in the Aiyuk trade, or get back a pick that they can then engage a third team and get a receiver. It's almost like we need a receiver, but we don't want Aiyuk. You know what I mean?
Yep.
We have an all-pro receiver that we drafted. We saw, Niner fans saw Kyle Shanahan show rare emotion when on draft night, the year they drafted Aiyuk. He was sitting there with his family. He was super excited to have Aiyuk. And now, something's wrong with the relationship, and now you don't want Aiyuk. Now it's like, okay, you're going to move Aiyuk in a trade, but now you got to get a receiver back to replace him. And maybe that receiver will be another high-priced receiver. So is it that you don't want to pay a high-priced receiver, or is it you just don't want to pay your high-priced receiver, Brandon Aiyuk? And then the question is there, Niner fans are like, hey, get Davante Adams. But Davante Adams is 32. Cortland Sutton is younger, but he doesn't really separate. And Shanahan loves separation. T. Higgins is intriguing, but, the Bengals – when they say they're not going to make a trade, they just don't make a trade. The Bengals are like the last team that probably makes a trade. The one guy that to me is interesting is I was reading that Minnesota may trade Jordan Addison because of his issues off the field. Would you try to engage Minnesota and get a young guy like Addison? Now he's had some DUIs. He's had some problems off the field, but man, he's a hell of a receiver. That's for damn sure. I don't know. Kendrick Bourne does not move the needle for me. Amari Cooper was not going to be an exciting acquisition. Now, if you can flip picks for Sutton or Adams or Higgins or Addison, somebody like that, now I'm intrigued. DeAndre Hopkins, something like that. But I don't know. I'm not intrigued by Kendrick Bourne, and I was not intrigued by Amari Cooper. Did either of those names excite you? And is there a receiver out there that you think, you could see the Niners somehow taking some picks from Pittsburgh and spinning him to a third team for that receiver?
See, that's the issue. It's like you could get 75 cents on the dollar for Brandon Aiyuk, and you talk about these other wide receiver targets. Kendrick Bourne is not even close to being a number one like Aiyuk is, and he's coming off a torn ACL. A player like Jordan Addison as a rookie, 108 targets, 70 catches, 911 yards, and 10 touchdowns. He had really good production. He's entering his age 22 season, but he can't stop driving fast in cars, as he's had multiple instances in which he's gotten in trouble doing that. And if we're going to talk about Kyle Shanahan being rubbed the wrong way with Aiyuk's antics, Jordan Addison would probably piss him off as well. A player like Amari Cooper is older, but he's been highly productive. He's sneakily on a Hall of Fame track. He's had 7 1,000-yard seasons in 9 years, so he's been a highly productive player. He likes to go up and down, but is he going to be a guy who is a fan of running dig routes? Is he going to block in Kyle Shanahan's offense? He hasn't really shown a willingness to do that. That'll rub Kyle Shanahan the wrong way. So if I look at wide receiver targets for Aiyuk, George Pickens would be great. Steelers aren't trading him away. The whole point of them trading for Aiyuk is to pair Aiyuk up with George Pickens. Davante Adams is 31 years old, about to turn 32. He hasn't declined as far as production. That would be a short-term move to maximize your Super Bowl window right now. But is there a huge gap between Davante Adams and Brandon Aiyuk? No. So why don't you just pay Brandon Aiyuk, who's 5 years younger than Davante Adams? If you want to flip Aiyuk for another wide receiver, T. Higgins, that would be of interest to me because he's young. He's really good. He has very good size. But again, this all comes back to why don't the Niners just retain Aiyuk, who's everything that they envision him becoming? When they took him 25th overall in the 2020 draft out of Arizona State, they, in a dream scenario, saw him becoming an all-pro. He just became an all-pro. When you think about this Niners team and the characteristics of it and the identity of this football team, they are tough, rugged, physical. They want players who love ball, who have dedication. They want players as part of their player development program who work hard, get better, and progress. Aiyuk's been able to do all of that. How many wide receivers are going to be willing blockers downfield like Aiyuk is? How many wide receivers in the league have the footwork and the route running and the separation skills and ability to pick up yards after the catch like Aiyuk? How many wide receivers are goal line to goal line threats where when you get inside the red zone and in between the 20s, you're still a big time playmaker, unlike a Tyreek Hill, who's very limited because of his lack of size. Aiyuk is a great scheme fit. He's respected by his coaches and his teammates. He's earned this bag that he's looking for. He's willing to take less. He's done everything that you've asked of him. As a team, you've won a lot. You've put time into him developing, and he's become an excellent player. And now the difference is $2 million average annual value and a few $1,000,000 in guaranteed money. And I think to how other teams operate, right? A team like the Philadelphia Eagles, they get ahead of this stuff. They don't let these contract situations linger. They sign their players earlier in the offseason to get ahead of the market. The Niners could have done that with Aiyuk. They could have had him at $25, $26 million per year. But because they operate with these contracts, we've always done it this way, so why change? Now we're in a situation where Aiyuk's become more expensive because the market has exploded. Yet Philadelphia and Howie Roseman, a team who you're competing with and against in the NFC, they have Devontae Smith at $25 million per year. The Detroit Lions acted quickly in signing Amon-Ra St. Brown. They have him at about $28 million per year. But because you waited, it's now cost you, and now you run the risk of losing Aiyuk to another team.